This video will cover all the review that you need to understand for the Chapter 6 test coming up next class. Your test will start with several true-false questions. There are 20 of them. So here's a sample of what that will look like. Number 1, the base angles of a trapezoid are congruent. We know that the base angles of a trapezoid are congruent if it's isosceles, but that doesn't say that here, so we're going to have to say false. You always have to assume that if you could draw another trapezoid, and remember all trapezoid means is that the lines are parallel, the bases, and then connect the other two, you can clearly see that this is still a trapezoid, parallel lines, but the base angles, top here, those are not the same. This obtuse angle is not the same as that angle, so we have to say false. If this said isosceles, then we would say true. So a lot of the true-false questions are going to have a lot of thinking about what those properties are very specifically. So that being said, in number 2, the diagonals of a trapezoid are congruent. That's also false because the diagonals of an isosceles trapezoid are congruent, not just regular old trapezoids. Number 3, a kite is a parallelogram. That's false. If you draw a kite, and for the true-false, I suggest you draw as many pictures as you can. If you draw a kite, even a rough kite, this is not a very good drawing, but you can see that a parallelogram has to have two sets of parallel sides. And these sides opposite each other are not parallel, so that's false. However, the best way to draw a kite, we mentioned, was to draw one segment, draw a perpendicular segment, and then connect those two ends. So it is true that in a kite that we have perpendicular diagonals. So number 4 is true. But the diagonals of a kite are not congruent, and from my rough sketch you can see that. This diagonal I drew much longer than the shorter one, so this is false. And then the opposite sides of a kite are congruent. Again, in my very rough sketch you can see that this short side is definitely not the same length as its opposite side, which is much longer. So that would also be false. So there are 20 of those on your test, and what you need to remember is it's best to draw a picture, a rough sketch, but try and draw it several different ways. If you can't draw it without the statement being true, then it's probably true. If you can draw several examples that doesn't fit the statement, for example, number 1, the base angles of my trapezoid were not the same, then I have to say false. That's my suggestion to you on that particular section. The next section of your test will be all about, is this shape or is this shape not a parallelogram? So we're going to start with number 7. You're going to get some given information marked on there for you. I've given you a pair of alternate interior angles. We know that alternate interior angles means that opposite sides cut by that transversal will be parallel. And I'm going to stop right here and say, you know what? I have this side that is 8 and parallel to this side that is 8 and parallel. So I have one set of sides that is congruent and parallel at the same time. That's one of my reasons to say yes, this is a parallelogram. If you forget that theorem, we could have also said it this way. Since this pair of angles is the same and this pair of opposite sides is the same, I could have marked this diagonal reflexive to itself and then said, you know what, I have a side angle side matching a side angle side, which means by CP/CTC, these two sides of those triangles are congruent, which means I have one set, two sets of opposite sides that are congruent, so it's still yes. I can avoid all that work on number 8 if I just remember, again, if one set of sides, opposite sides I should say, is both congruent and parallel to the other side, that's a yes. So number 8, same reason. Number 9 is in direct contrast to that. I have one set of sides that is congruent, and I have one set of sides that is parallel. Well, that's not enough information and I have to say no. And the reason is I could draw one set of parallel sides. So I made my top base parallel to my bottom base. And then when I connect these two sides, I'll try and keep them the same length. This could be 6 and this could be 6. So with the exact same information, one set parallel, one set congruent, I could be drawing an isosceles trapezoid. So this I have to say no, it's not definitely a parallelogram. On number 10, I'm missing one small piece. We do know that in a parallelogram the diagonals bisect each other, so this diagonal is being bisected. but not both diagonals, and that keyword both is important. So I have to say no, because in a kite, I could cut the short diagonal in half, but then make this diagonal much longer, so I'd have one set of congruent segments in that kite, but this piece could be marked with 2, which is not the same as this one. So it's not a parallelogram, could be a kite. In number 11, this is the straightforward. I got one set of congruent sides, second set of congruent sides. That's definitely a parallelogram. But the last one, number 12, if all I know is I have a right angle here, it's tempting to say yes, because we do know that a rhombus has diagonals that are perpendicular. But, as we've mentioned already, so does a kite. So if I draw this kite, I'm still going to have this right angle in the middle. I'll get it in a rhombus and a square. I'll also get it in a kite. So that by itself is not enough to guarantee me that it's going to be a parallelogram, because it could be a kite. So I have to say no. And those are the first two sections that you're going to get on your test. True, false, and then is it or is it not a parallelogram.